Well, hello there. My name is Nancy Love, and I'm making this video for the Planet Peace Project, an organization dedicated to helping save and change the world for the better. Um, Many of you were not alive during the original March on Washington. It occurred 60 years ago, almost to the day. I'm making this on August the 27th, 2023. And the famous March on Washington occurred on August 28th, 1963. More than a quarter of a million people came to Washington, D.C. to voice their concerns for civil rights, for human rights, and for dignity for one and all. Now, this whole context, in which I'm not exactly sure why this is kind of messing up here, but anyway, um, I was a 6 year old child, and I was sitting cross legged on the floor of the dining room where we had our black and white TV, right? And I made a comment that it was interesting that we'd heard of color TVs, but we didn't have one yet. And I said, it's interesting that I'm watching the March on Washington on a black and white television, isn't it? And my people said, why is that? And I said, because if it was all black or it was all white, it wouldn't work. The only way it works is because it's black and white. And they laughed and they said, well, that was very insightful for a child. One of the most incredible things was that there were people of all colors there, and there were people of passion and dignity there. And one of the most appalling things is that it's 60 years later. And although we've come down a very long path with affirmative action and with uh, significantly greater equal opportunities for all, we still have things like arbitrary violence committed against people simply because of the color they are, and all kinds of discrimination committed against people simply because of the color they are. We have to fix this, and we have to fix it now. There are so many massive planetary issues that the human species has to triumph over. We have to figure out how to get along long enough to do that. We do have climate change, and I won't talk to anybody who thinks that humans haven't affected the planet with overpopulation and pollution. We have, and that's just a matter of science. If you don't understand the greenhouse effect, you should not have made it out of elementary school. You should be sent back to fourth grade physical science class, because if you know anything at all about science, you know that human caused pollution has affected the climate very deleteriously. And we've had more than 2,000 nuclear explosions or tests in the years uh, subsequent to the debacle of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the greatest terrorist act of all time, at least modern history, was, you know, nuking a city. We can't let that happen again. The soul of Albert Einstein forbids it. And we have so many other issues. We have tremendous animal abuse issues throughout the entire world, and everything from kill shelters to live transport of animals across oceans when they're bound for death. We have fur farms and factory farms, and we absolutely have to get our souls right with the animals of this world. We've created a mass extinction event, and just the wildfires in Canada this year that have burned such a tremendous amount of land, of trees, of habitat, killed so many animals that had every right to that forest, more than we do. These events are definitely causing a tremendous imbalance in the world. Now, we also might need to be able to get along with extraterrestrials soon because we're kind of starting to figure out that that's also part of the overall plan. And I think that one of the reasons I liked Gene Roddenberry so much when I was a kid, and the Star Trek legacy that lives on in the name of Admiral Roddenberry, the Time Fleet captain, um, is that he postulated that not only in the future would people of all races manage to get along on the good ship Enterprise, he actually thought that we were so magnanimous and capable of peace and mediation and negotiation that we would be able ultimately to get along with members of species that weren't even from around here. And I thought, well, that's a stretch, but I think that we can reach that far. So here we are. It's 60 years later. We've come a long way, baby, but we have a long way to go. I remember sitting there as a 6 year old, and there was this young man, and he got up. It was his turn to talk, and for whoever he was, he had a right to. I'd already heard about the Freedom Riders, the people who were risking their lives and sometimes ending up in emergency rooms and so forth with injuries to integrate the bus system in the South. Rosa Parks and all these courageous people, Martin Luther King, who were who were really taking tremendous risks. White people too, sitting right there in the buses with uh, everybody else, just like everybody else was capable of getting along. It was really a passionate and noble thing, those freedom riders, and I love them still. But so I was sitting there, and keep in mind, I was just a kid. I didn't know all these names and didn't recognize all the faces. There was this beautiful young man, so stately and dignified, and he got up to speak at the March on Washington. And there were all these older men in the background milling about, talking amongst themselves. Right there, although you could see that there was a speaker and that he was, the podium was dedicated to whatever he had to say right then and there. And yet all these older guys weren't really even listening to him, even though they were, I thought, supposed to be. So I said, why aren't those older people listening to him? And they said, I don't know, they're, doing something, talking amongst themselves. And I said, no, no, out of the mouths of babes. I said, no, they should be listening to that young man because he is going to be important to history. Whoever that guy is, I can tell he is going to be very important to history. And so he was. I was listening to the inimitable John Lewis, who spent decades of his life in civilian service, public service. He was in Congress for umpteen gazillion years. He was arrested 40 something times, even while he was in Congress. He suffered tremendous injuries and he suffered tremendous losses, and he reaped the harvest of nobility and dignity for his soul. And I am absolutely certain, I am, people, absolutely certain that John Lewis lives on in love. John Lewis, the tree just rained something down upon us. John Lewis lives in the heart of love. and He can speak through us all and to us all even today. We have a long way to go. Now I'll get a little personal because there isn't something that's just called one way racism, right? And given the amount of suffering that some people have endured, they might not want to hear what I have to say about being white and blonde, but I'm going to say it anyway because it's extremely relevant and it's very pertinent to this whole phenomenon. This is not white skin. This is a shade of tan. This is a fairly light shade of tan. I don't really have anything that's, entirely white with me right this moment, but look at a piece of paper. That's white. This is some beige kind of cream colored shade of tan. And every human being I've ever encountered in my entire life was neither black nor white nor even, any other specific color. They were some variation of tan. Now, what we have here, and incidentally, the person I knew in my life with the whitest skin color was actually an albino Negro. He was an Afro American, but he was born with an albino gene. So the whitest person I've ever known was actually a black man. Go figure. And I said, boy, you must have had a life. Well, he was called The Voice. He had a beautiful voice in Austin, Texas. And I just want Malcolm to know that I am called The Voice now. I'm called The Voice in California because I speak for freedom for all. Freedom from the mafia, freedom from criminal activity, freedom from abuse of power among police forces and so forth. I speak and I speak loud. And call me the voice. I hope he hears that now. But I do want you all to understand some people are prejudiced against me because of the way I look. And they say Mexican women have told me that they were trained by their madres in Mexico to hate me on sight because I have blonde hair. Recently, how smart is that really? And you could be like Christ in a skirt or the Buddha of compassion and have blonde hair, and then people are going to hate you on sight. No, that's not right, and it's not reverse racism if the person you're being racist against was never been racist against you. If someone spent her whole life being the rainbow person, being the ally, being, I was an ally before the word hit the vernacular. It's not reverse racism to be racist against people who are white when those specific people were basically spiritually on the bus by the time they were 5. When I was 5 and heard all this stuff about the Freedom Riders and that how they were risking their lives and getting all physically injured, and how in one case some people tried to set one of the buses on fire. Some people tried to set a bus on fire that was full of people who just wanted everybody to be able to sit together and get along. I said, where are those people? And my people said, well, they're like 1,200 miles away. And I said, well, can I get on the bus? Can I be a freedom rider? And they said, well, you're too small and you're far away. So I said, well, can I spiritually get on the bus? And they said, right on, kid, And so when I was 5 years old, I spiritually got on the bus with the Freedom Riders. And as far as I'm concerned, you're either on that bus or you're off the bus. And if you're off the bus with the Freedom Riders, then you have no right to be called an American. I'm really sick of this racism. I'm sick of it one way, I'm sick of it the other. I'm sick of being told by Mexicans that I can't be loved because I have blonde hair. And it gets worse from there. Recently, I was sitting there, I'm in a wheelchair, and I was just sitting there in my wheelchair, haplessly doing something when some black woman came uh, past me, and there was a large crowd of people, and she just waved her hands indignantly, and she said, "Ooh, I hate you! I hate you because you have that hair! I hate blonde hair!" And she just walked right past, and everybody was going, "Wow!" And it was a rainbow crowd. There were all kinds of different people sort of defending me, and they almost crowded around me to protect me from this woman. She was obviously agitated. She looked sort of like a meth head. She looked like someone who had a life straight out of hell, but that didn't mean she had to share it with me. And it goes on. I had to go to a reference library in a part of Los Angeles, California, that is basically a black neighborhood. And in this digital age, you wouldn't think that would happen, but it back. But the only place in Los Angeles library system where this particular information was that I needed to gather and make copies of was in a neighborhood that was very far southeast and not one I was familiar with. I could walk then, so I was just walking around the neighborhood like a regular person. And I noticed, but didn't care, that I was the only white person I saw, that all kinds of well meaning people, I kid you not, all kinds of very well meaning people, older ladies, older men, young kids, seriously, children, um, teenage girls, teenage boys, black teenage boys, the kind of person you might think a person who looked like me would have been intimidated by or frightened of, but I wasn't, would just come up to me and say, in the most well meaning way, "Lady, you need to cover your hair. You don't know where you are. You think you're safe. You don't know this this hood." They s- I One lady, an older woman, a black lady said, "You need to put on a hoodie and cover your hands and wear big glasses and don't show your hair and don't show your skin around here because you're a target just looking the way you are." So, what I just said is not nearly the same as what I've heard from some of my black friends. I've heard them say things like, Nancy, I could tell the day you and I met that you really see me. And they'll say things like, "I look for prejudice. I look whenever I meet a white person. I look for uh, the slight narrowing of eyes or the glaring or the looking askance." People in America, born here, who are black and probably brown as well. And now we have the whole Asian issue with people being prejudiced against Asians on site, thinking they're in some way responsible for COVID, and they're not. Um, these people expect prejudice, and they're kind of surprised when they don't see it, and it's very refreshing. And they say, "Isn't it wonderful that I've had people thank me for just seeing a person." I really, really have had people of color say, "Thank you for seeing a human being. The first time you looked at me, I could tell that you just saw me and you didn't see a color first." And I said, "Do you know why? It's because I see straight into souls. I see souls, not colors. And all souls are clear. You can see straight through them." and they'll say, "Thank you for seeing straight through my soul." Now that brings us to the immortal word